My name's Rich Najuch, and we're at the New Huntington Theater in Huntington, Indiana. And I'm one of the owners of the theater, and I have owned the theater with Joel Frumkin since June of 2007. And here in the balcony, we believe that we may have a ghost who lives here. And our first indication that we thought that there was a ghost here actually came pretty early on in 2008. In December of 2008, we had a Christmas show going on downstairs. And there was a photographer in for the Christmas show that took a whole bunch of pictures one particular night. And then there were other nights that pictures were taken. And one of the actors pointed out that the one particular night, all of the photographs had an orb in them, and pointed out that that's an indication that there's a spirit or a ghost or something there. And at that time we were like, oh, well, that's ridiculousness, that's foolishness. But shortly after that, strange things started happening. And too many of them have happened over the course of the time to not believe that there's something going on here, at least. One of the first indications after those orbs was we started having occurrences in our kitchen downstairs. And it's just a regular kitchen, just a common regular cabinets that we put in from Lowe's and all this sort of thing, but we heard noises in there, and to the point of that we thought that there was someone in there working, even though there wasn't supposed to be in here working, and we'd go in and there'd be no one there. So that's kind of strange. But one day I was in the basement under the kitchen, which is just a small space, and it's maybe 20 feet by 20 feet with a 6-foot ceiling, if that, even 5.5, 6-foot ceiling. So I'm right there, right above my head is the floor of the kitchen, and I clearly hear someone walking around and the rafters shaking and someone moving around the space, to the point that I thought there must be 2 or 3 people up there. Cabinet doors opening and closing. And so I went upstairs to see if maybe someone had come into work earlier or whatnot and that. And when I get into the kitchen, there was no one there. And all of the cabinet doors were open. And they hadn't been open when I walked through the kitchen to get to the basement 2 minutes earlier. So I was a little spooked, and I walked through the whole building. I was the only one here. All of the doors were locked, and I found that kind of strange. So that was one of the first major indications. Then over the years, several strange other things have happened. Things have gone missing and then reappeared. And, it is a 10,000 square foot building, so you say, well, of course things go missing and then turn up again. But it's not really like that. It's really clear that these things that have gone missing have been placed where they reappeared. I mean, one particular example is I have my keys, which I have about 20 keys on the key ring. There's every lock in this building has a different door, and then there's a house that the actors live in that has 3 different locks on it, and then there's my car keys and padlock keys and such. So it's a substantial key ring. And one year in March or April, it went missing. Couldn't find it. And I searched and searched and searched, and we tore apart all of my office and the work area where we do the construction work and everything, the cars. We couldn't find the key ring. And that was in March or April. We went through the summer that year. We had our summer shows like we always do. They started in June and ended in mid-August. By mid-August, we're always exhausted because we've been doing a show every night and rehearsing every day. And we had the last show on a Saturday night. On Sunday morning, we got up, we picked up the actors from the Actors House, drove them to Indianapolis to the airport. My mother, who's here and helps us and lives in Ohio some of the time, left to go to Ohio, so everyone was gone. It was just Joel, the other owner, and I that were here. We came back to the theater. All the doors were locked and everything, and I went into my office and sat down on my desk, and right in the middle of my keyboard was my key ring with my 25 or 30 keys on it, sitting right on the keyboard of my desk with nothing else on the desk. The desk wasn't a mess. It wasn't like I'd sat for 6 months and said, I can't find these keys that are sitting right here on my G and H key on my keyboard. So I immediately called my mother and said, did you find my keys? And she said no. And I called the stage manager for the summer and said, had you found my keys? And he said no. And these people are all gone at this point. We had left that morning, no keys on the keyboard. We came back 3 or 4 hours later from the drive in Indianapolis. No one's been in the building. Everyone's gone. And the keys are sitting there right on my keyboard. So I think that at that point, that's another instance of, I think the ghost had the keys and was either playing with me or something like that. Another situation that we had with the ghost is a friend. We were gone for a month, and we had a friend stay in the apartment, the projectionist apartment, because we wanted someone to watch the theater, and just, people knew we were going to be gone for a month going and doing a show in New York, so we wanted someone to stay here and just make sure everything was okay, that the pipes didn't freeze and that sort of thing. And we didn't tell him about the ghost because we thought, why stir things up? If something happens, he'll find out about it otherwise and whatnot. And we weren't gone for less than 24 hours when we got a phone call from him that said, "Is there something that you forgot to tell me?" And I just kind of said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Is there a ghost here?" And I said, "Well, we think maybe in the past." And I said, "What happened?" And the ghost seems to like kitchen cabinets, because what happened was he got home from work that night and back to our apartment and went into the bathroom and closed the door to the bathroom and took a shower and came out and got dressed and everything and came out of the bathroom and went into the kitchen, and all of the kitchen cabinets were open, just like they had been downstairs in the downstairs kitchen when I had come upstairs that day. And he hadn't left the kitchen cabinets open, he'd left them all closed, and the same situation, all the doors were locked, there was no one there, we were out of town, anyone else who had a key to the building was 500-600 miles away, so he was quite spooked by that and actually ended up going home to his house that night and didn't stay here. About a year and a half ago or so, the ghost, we think, made an appearance during one of the shows. We have the shows in the lobby downstairs, and the audience is all around the stage, and the actors are on the stage there, and the other owner narrates the show and in between the songs. And so while he was narrating one night, he just stopped, and the owner just stopped, and he said, "Well, what do you need?" Or something like that, like what's going on, what do you need? And he thought he saw someone standing right there at the stage, and he thought it was one of the servers or myself or one of the other employees coming up to him and saying that something was wrong. And I was standing in the audience, and my mother was standing in the audience, and there were 72 people in the audience, and none of us saw anything. But he insists that someone walked across the front of the stage and stopped and looked at him. He can't really see because of the lights in his eyes, so he couldn't see who it was, but he insists that there was someone there to this day. The most fun story about the ghost is that we have this huge theater and auditorium that we've been renovating, and it's just a couple of us that do the work. So it's my mother who helps, my father who helps, and then Joel, the other owner, and a couple of friends. And one day my mother's working in the auditorium, and she's cleaning stuff up, and she's bending down and sorting through things on a shelf or on the floor or whatnot and that, and she got goosed, and she thought that my father was there, and she immediately jumped up and swung around to smack him, just to give him a light smack, like playful sort of smack sort of thing, and there's no one there. And he was not in the room, and she insists that it was certainly a forceful pinch on her behind, and apparently the ghost has a playful side and must be attracted to my mother or something like that. So that's probably the most fun story about the ghost. And we never knew who it was. We never knew anything about this person, this spirit that's here. But about 3 or 4 years ago, I was in a store, and a gentleman was helping me. It was an appliance store, and a gentleman was helping me load a refrigerator that I'd bought for the actor's house onto my truck. And he said, "You own the theater, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, this gentleman's in his 40s or 50s probably, and he says to me, "I was never allowed to go there." And I thought that was strange, because usually people say, "Oh, I had my first date there," or my wife and I had my first date there, or the last movie I saw was Star Wars or Titanic or something like that. Usually there's a story, but I'd never heard anyone say I wasn't allowed to go there. So I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, my mother didn't let me go there because her father died there." And I said, "Oh, well, that's kind of interesting, because, I'm thinking that's kind of interesting because we think there's a ghost there." So I asked him, "Well, so your grandfather died there?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, why was he there?" And he said, "Well, he was the night janitor, and he was there overnight every night cleaning, and like the night watchman janitor type. And we had watchman boxes, so there was a watchman at some point, I know, because the boxes with the key turns in them were here." And he said that what happened was he was there overnight, and the next morning, one day, they came in and he had a heart attack and died. So they found him the next morning. And that's the only story that I know of someone passing away here in the building. Now, the building's 108 years old at this point, and there were big shows that used to come through here in the 1910s and 1920s and such, and you don't know what happened at that point. Maybe there was another person who had some sort of untimely demise or something here, but this is the only one that I know of, so we suspect that this gentleman is the ghost, and that he plays around with us a little bit, and because he's had ownership of the building, he took care of the building for many years, and then he passed away here. So that's where we suspect he came from, and we suspect he lives somewhere up here in the balcony. It was one of the reasons why we're up here. You see movement in the area behind me often, and in this area over here, and that's where we suspect he is, where his home base is, basically. And I have no idea where. No one ever told me, where this gentleman passed away. But I will say, these seats rock. So if I was the night watchman, I probably would take a nap somewhere in here. And it all kind of makes sense as far as that timeline's concerned.